Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So we're gonna get started. For those in the back, I see some seats here, so you can get seated and comfortable. Get comfortable. So I'm Brahima Koulibaly. I'm the director of the Africa program here at Brookings. So thank you for the privilege of your time to discuss this important topic, not just globally, but for Africa in particular. Inequality is clearly an important issue that is at the center of much of the discourse, and it is everywhere. And then some aspects of it kind of offends our sense of fairness and appears to be an affront to human dignity. It also has dire implications for economic prosperity, social cohesion, and political stability. So we are very much pleased to partner with the chief economist of the Office of the UNDP, led by Dr. Roman Gilpin, who is a good friend of our Africa program. And we share some of the same passion and commitment to socio-economic development issues of the continent. And we are both just together at a conference that we co-organized with the German Development Institute on how to address Africa's employment challenges over the next 2 decades. So hopefully we'll get through this, Raymond, without being the jet lag kicking in just yet. We've had the privilege to host here at Brookings, Pedro Concenciao, the director of the Human Development Report Office, back in December, to discuss the report more broadly in a private roundtable. So today's event, we're happy to open it up to the public to have a wider conversation, to explore the issues of inequality, but particularly in the African context. So the panelists will address issues such as the fundamental drivers of inequality and some of the socio-economic implications, and importantly, how do we address it? A key message coming out of the report, which I encourage you all to read, and there were copies also of the report outside. So if you haven't gotten one, please sure to get one. And a key message from that report basically is that understanding and responding to inequality demands a revolution in analysis and approach. And we'll get to hear more about what that revolution is and what that new approach is. We would also explore in the African context specifically what implication it has for economic development. So we are fortunate to have a really distinguished panel for the event that I will introduce shortly after a brief presentation by Heriberto Tapia, who is a policy specialist and senior member of the Human Development Reports Office. And he has been part of all the previous editions of the report since 2015. So he's in a good position to clearly say how this report is different from the previous ones and put it in the context of the lessons that have been learned. So with that, please join me in welcoming him to the podium, and then I'll come back later to introduce the panelists, and then we can get started.
Thank you very much for the invitation. For me, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you to Brookings. Thank you to the colleagues from UNDP that have organized this event. So I'm going to give you a very brief presentation of our Human Development Report, Beyond Income, Beyond Averages, and Beyond Today, Inequalities and Human Development in the 21st Century. So our basic starting point when we began the writing of this report was this documentation of increasing dissatisfaction with inequality. Where we tracked this in several surveys, even before the protests that we have seen over the last few months, we saw that somehow this feeling of dissatisfaction with inequality was growing. However, when we saw the objective indicators, we didn't see quite a good match. In a way, we were experiencing some of the best moments in humanities, looking at typical indicators. And also when we see indicators about inequality, in particular the Gini coefficient based on income, we don't see a clear trend that matches the feeling that is coming from people. So we developed like a new framework to try to see how to interpret inequality from the point of view of the experiences of people. And this framework is based on three core elements. First, going beyond income, because development is multidimensional. Second, going beyond averages, because it is important to be able to see the different experiences across the whole distribution. Inequality is about dispersion, so we need to be able to see what is happening in different places, and not only with an aggregate measure. And also, inequality, we need to be able to go beyond today, because from a qualitative point of view, the inequality that people are experiencing today might not be the same like in the past. And if we want to think about what is going to happen in the future, maybe inequalities are going to be having a different shape. So based on these principles, we can see some clear results. First, inequality is very big when we look at human development indicators. So in this picture, you can see how for Sub-Saharan Africa and for the developed countries, there is huge dispersion in results in terms of the Human Development Index on the one hand, and also in terms of one of the key components, life expectancy at birth. So in Sub-Saharan Africa, you can see that inequality in human development means underdevelopment. There are differences of more than 25 years between some sub-regions. These points represent subnational regions and others. Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, is the continent with the highest, is the region with the highest level of inequality in the world. So according to our estimations, it loses 31% of its human development index because of inequality. So it's a severe problem. When we look at another dimension of inequality, gender inequality, Sub-Saharan Africa is also the region with the highest level of inequality. Second, inequality is sticky and unfair. Inequality transmits over the life cycle of people, and also it can be transmitted from one generation to another. This figure shows what we call the Great Gatsby curve for human development. So in the horizontal axis, we have the level of inequality in human development. In the vertical axis, we have the lack of social mobility, and we can see the correlation. So when we have high inequality in human development, we also have low social mobility. And you can see that most of the African countries are on the top to the right, that is with high inequality and with low human development, and with low social mobility. Third, in this report, we identify what we call a new generation of inequalities. And this is based on the key insight that development is a cumulative process that starts with some basic steps and then is followed by other more advanced steps. So let me give you an example. In the case of life expectancy at birth is something that reflects the basic steps because it's very correlated with infant mortality, the ability to survive the first years of life. When we look at what is the dynamic, so this is a dynamic exercise and the progress of life expectancy at birth across different group of countries, the pattern that we see is that the progress in low human development countries is much bigger than the progress in more developed countries. So this is a good news. There is progress across the board, but the progress is more intense in the poorer countries. So this means inequality is going down. There is some sort of convergence. However, when we see what is going on with inequality at older ages, that reflects what happens later, what happens with health services, what happens with the opportunities of people to extend their lives, the pattern is the opposite. So countries that are more developed are going much faster in their progress in this dimension. So in this case, we have an increase in inequality, a divergence. What happens with education, another dimension? Again, in the basics, in primary education, we have that over the last 10 years, roughly speaking, countries with relatively low human development have been making more progress than countries that are more developed. Again, reduction in inequality, convergence. But what happens when we see access to tertiary education? The opposite is true. Countries that are more developed are going much faster, in this case, 6 times faster than the low human development countries. Another example, what happens with access to technologies? The same thing, basic technologies, in this case, mobile phones, not necessarily smartphones, we have a pattern of convergence. In the case of more advanced technology, like fixed broadband, we have a pattern of divergence with more developed countries going, in this case, 14 times faster than the low human development countries. This is across countries, but we also have evidence within countries for most of these variables, and again, it is the same pattern. In this case, it's Côte d'Ivoire, access to mobile phones, now taking into account quintiles within the country, we have convergence in the basics, but when it comes to access to computers, something more advanced, something that can give higher level of empowerment, we have a pattern of divergence. So here we have like something very structural happening, right? With some groups of what we call the basic capabilities, which represent the first step in the process of development, the entry level step of the process of development. And on the other hand, we have the more enhanced capability, which are the following ones. And the conclusion of our analysis across different dimensions between countries and within countries is that we have convergence in the basics. So this is something that is fully in line with this idea that the world is actually making a lot of progress in human development, but we have divergence or increasing inequalities in enhanced capability. And this is important because enhanced capabilities tend to bring more empowerment to people. And this is one of the keys, in our view, to understand why there is this sense of dissatisfaction, because people are making progress. However, once they get to some point, they see that others are going even faster in the things that are becoming increasingly important in the 21st century. So more inequalities in areas with more empowerment. We have also an analysis about gender inequality, a chapter about gender inequality. And again, it's more or less the same story. Here we have 2 examples. On the one hand, we have the gender gaps in politics. When we observe what happens with the entry-level empowerment action, the ability to vote, we have that the gap is very small. But as the level of power associated with some positions and actions to be able to become part of the parliament, of the government, then the gaps start increasing. When it comes to the economy, the same pattern. In occupations that are bringing little empowerment, actually women are overrepresented. But as we move to occupations that bring more empowerment, there is a greater inequality. So, so the report presents a set of options, policy options. So at the end of the day, inequality is a social construct, and I think there are multiple ways we can tackle it. But in the context of Africa, I think it's important to see that there is a very significant space to improve with the basics. So in other parts of the world, the convergence in the basic has been much more intense, but in the case of Africa, there is a big unfinished business that has to be part of the policy agenda. But second, there are some parts of the population and other parts of the world that are not stopping, right? So it's important that in Africa also it's able to move forward to try to reduce the new inequalities that are growing everywhere. I think if we keep doing the same, these inequalities are gonna keep growing, and this is a big issue. So I think part of the responsibility is to try to new ways to leapfrog. So by reducing the inequalities in the basic capabilities, also try to target the inequalities in the more enhanced capabilities. There are some examples, for instance, in the case of Ethiopia, the way they have tackled the increase in the coverage of pre-primary education, something that we consider an enhanced capability, is one of those that teach us how countries that might not have a lot of income can still move very fast with the new capabilities. Finally, it's very important looking forward to keep into account, to having into account what's happening with two key drivers: one, climate change, and second, technological change. So I think this is a big challenge. It's very difficult. I am very pleased that now we have a very good panel to see how we tackle these three challenges. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.